In this video, I will walk you through how to loom knit a triangle shawl. The shawl is a simple pattern of alternating rows of Ewraps and purls with decreases on each row to create the triangle shape. For this pattern, you will need a small 3/8 inch loom with at least 190 pegs. I use the KB Adjustable Loom. You will also need about 800 yards of worsted weight 4 yarn. Let's begin. We are going to start with a slip knot to do a crochet chain cast on. So you're going to take your slip knot and stretch it out because you're going to pull it around your first peg. I have the yellow peg marker noting the first peg and the pink peg marker noting the last peg. So I'm going to take my slip knot, take that loop and wrap it around that first peg so the loop is behind that first peg. And then I'm going to take my working yarn, and so you have the option to do this with a crochet hook or without a crochet hook. So using the crochet hook, I'm going to take the working yarn and pull it through. I usually use my hand, so you're going to see me struggle here with this very fuzzy yarn. Alright. Probably need a bigger crochet hook. I'm going to pull it through to make a new loop. We're going to pull it tight. I'm going to pull the tail of my slip knot behind and tighten it. I can also pull the working yarn so my loop is not too big. And then I'm going to take the loop again over the second peg so it goes behind. Pull the working yarn through the loop to create a new loop, and again tighten. I keep the working yarn tight so it doesn't create a huge loop, and then pull on the loop to tighten. And then we'll continue that all the way around to cast on a total of 190 pegs. So now we are finishing the row, and when we get to the last peg, which we remember is marked with the pink marker, we are going to take that final loop, tighten it, and just place it on that last peg and tighten by pulling on the working peg. And what I like to do, because you'll notice that each of these rows you can see has two strands of yarn on the backs of the peg, but because we put this loop on this peg, it only has one. I like to go ahead and just U-wrap that last peg. So just take the working yarn, wrap it in front on top of the yarn on the peg, and wrap it over. So now you'll also have 2 strands of yarn on that peg. I wanted to show you an alternative way to do the cast on. I know it can be a bit tricky to learn at first. So with this way, you'll again start with a slip knot. And you will take the slip knot and place it on the first peg and tighten it on the first peg. And then we're going to create a loop. We're going to bring the working yarn in front of our next peg and then bring it back through that loop. We're going to pull on the loop to tighten it and then bring the working yarn in front of the next peg and again through the loop to tighten it. I'm going to move the rest of my working yarn out of the way here, tighten the loop, bring the working yarn in front of the next peg and again through the loop, tighten. We're going to continue that all the way onto as many pegs as we need to cast on. And once we've casted on all of the pegs that we need to cast on, we're going to end by pulling the working yarn through the loop, and I'm just going to pull the working yarn in front to move it out of the way, but we're going to pull that loop onto the final peg and tighten that to finish the cast on. Just a quick tip, if you are working with the KB Adjustable Loom, I recommend that when you start with the pegs in the middle of the rounded end of the loom. So when you start, if you have your loom configured for exactly 190 pegs or the amount of pegs that you'll be working with, you would start here and end on this peg, and that way as you work and do your decreases, use the short pieces on this side, and that way you can remove them as you go and shorten the loom. I used my 40 peg long piece here, and then I used the short pieces here, and I am more than halfway done and am unable to shorten it until I get to here. And this loom is quite large, and although this video is shot on top of a table, I prefer working with the loom in my lap, and this is quite large and a bit awkward to work with. So starting on this side and ending on this side, decreasing as you go with the short ends connected on this side, will allow you to remove those pieces as you go, shorten the loom, and make it a bit easier to work with. So you'll notice that I cast it onto the right or counterclockwise. If you're left-handed or you prefer to cast on the other direction, you can cast on in either direction. We are going to start by going to the left and working a row of purls. If you cast it on in the other direction and you're starting by going to the right, that is fine. You can also start with a row of Ewraps. We're going to do the whole pattern in a garter stitch, which will be alternating rows of purls and Ewraps. So if you start with Ewraps and do purls for the next row, that's fine as well. We will slip the first and last peg in each row. So slipping the first peg means we will skip and not knit the first peg, and when we get to the last peg, we will U-knit that last peg for each row. So after the first row, we will be decreasing on every row, but if you start the pattern with an E-wrap instead of a purl, that will work out fine. So I'm going to start my row of purls by bringing the working yarn in front, picking up the yarn on the peg, bringing my hook below the yarn, and under the working yarn and bringing that out to create a new loop, and picking that up and bringing it over the peg and pulling the working yarn to tighten. We will continue that on the next peg. And we will continue the entire row with the purl stitch. And at our final peg here, noted with the yellow peg marker, we are going to U-wrap to slip the last peg. So bring the working yarn over and bring the yarn on the peg over, just like that. And the first row is done. And now we are going to E-wrap in the other direction. Just a note, the peg markers are optional but recommended. If you don't have peg markers, you can use a rubber band or tape, though I have used masking tape previously on this loom and it left a lot of sticky residue, so you can also just scribble on it with a marker, but if you do not have anything to mark the pegs, I would recommend leaving an empty peg in between the first and last peg so you don't accidentally continue wrapping and then working around, which would then mess up the flat panel and mess up your project. So now we're going to go back and E-wrap the second row. Again, if you E-wrap the first row, you'll purl the second row, but now we're going to start with E-wrap. Since we're slipping the first peg, we're going to skip that first peg, and to E-wrap, we'll bring the yarn around the back and in front of the peg and wrap the yarn over. We'll continue that all the way around. Now we are going to stop on the second to last peg, and we are going to decrease by bringing the yarn from the last peg. Try not to grab your peg marker, and we're going to bring the yarn from the last peg and wrap it on that second to last peg. So we're going to have one last peg now, and we're going to still slip and U-wrap the last peg. You can grab both of the yarns at the same time. I find it easier to do one at a time. I already have this yarn on my hook, so I'm going to bring that over, and then I'm going to grab the second strand of yarn and bring that over. And now we have successfully done a decrease. And so you can bring your peg marker over one with every decrease that you have, so it is always on your last peg, but I am lazy, so I'm going to have the peg marker always be on the peg after my last peg. So when I decrease again, I will move this over. And now we are going to continue with a row of purls. Again, slipping the first peg and skipping that. So on your purl row, you're going to do the same thing going in the other direction. When you get to the second to last peg, you're going to take the yarn or the loop from your last peg, put it on your loom hook, and bring that over to the second to last peg. And then you're going to slip that last peg by bringing the working yarn in front above the two loops and knitting that over. So I did one at a time, did the first loop, and now I'll do the second. It's a little tight, so I just hold it to make sure my loop that's supposed to stay on does not fall off. And once that's done, we are going to continue with E-wrap, and we are going to repeat the previous two rows, the second and third row, basically until we run out of pegs. To switch colors, we're going to take our next color, a different color, and make a slip knot with our new yarn. We're going to place that on the peg. So you'll notice here that I've actually stopped before I've done the decrease and slipped the edges. So I'm going to place the new yarn on that peg here and tighten that slip knot. And what we're going to do is tie a knot between the loose end of this slip knot of the new yarn and the working yarn of our old yarn. I'm going to tie that together. Pull it tight. And then we can cut off the extra, cut off our first yarn. Pull it tight again, and then we're going to go ahead and take that loop from the slip knot and take it off the peg. So we're basically just tying the two yarns together, but we're placing the slip knot on the peg to make sure that we're getting that knot of the two yarns together as close to the peg as possible. So I'll pull on the working yarn of our new yarn to pull out that slip knot and just pull it again to tighten it a little bit more. And so now when I finish this row, I'm going to finish it with my new color. It's important to note that we're doing the color change at the end of a purl row, so that when we work the yarn, when we work our new color yarn, it will be on the row of E-wraps, because when we do the E-wraps with the new color, it won't have a visible change if you do the color change on a purl row, you'll see both colors and you'll have a line between your old and new color, which you don't want. So make sure to do your color change on an Ewrap row, and then you can continue with the pattern and do your row of Ewraps. We are finally at the end here on our last 4 pegs. So we are just going to E-wrap this 1 peg, and since we have 2 wrapped pegs left, I'm going to bring the yarn from the last peg over to do that decrease and slip that last peg. And now we're not going to purl at all because we just have 2 pegs left. I'm going to go ahead and bring that over to do our decrease going the other direction. I'm going to slip that. And now we just have 2 pegs left, so we're going to go ahead and bring the right peg over to the left peg, and then we're going to knit those together by bringing the bottom peg over the top, and we're ready to finish. And so what I'm going to do is we'll cut the end of the yarn and just leave a short tail here. And I am going to do a purl to pull the yarn through. So bring the tail of the yarn below, bring it under the loop, and pull it through. We're not, instead of looping it over, I'm just going to pull it all the way through. Bring my work off the loom and pull that tight so we have a nice pointy edge at the bottom of our triangle shawl. I can remove it from the loom and we are all done. So to completely finish the shawl, we'll just want to weave in all of our loose ends from the end, our cast on, and anywhere that we have changed colors.